All right, we got an episode of Alexander and Friends. We got Michael back on the show. Hello, Michael. So, as promised, we come back together after seeing Dune. The last time we did Batman whenever the trailer dropped, and we said we were going to come back and do Dune after seeing it. We've seen it in theaters, which was amazing. It was epic in every way. But I'm glad we went to go see it in the big screen before seeing it like on TV, just like doing the HBO Max.
Well,
yeah.
The scope of the movie deserved to be on a large cinematic screen for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to talk to. I don't know if I had the chance to tell you this earlier in the week, but I had very grand imagery, but by no way, shape, or form leaned on that. It had like an amazing story to tell, and like they did an amazing job telling the story. Like that was like what I walked away thinking about was how great this story was, even though it was, had these epic shots and these crazy spaceships that like it could have totally been lazy and leaned on all of that shit. Like, like Michael Bay leans on like explosions and big hurrahs. And then the story's kind of like, meh, this was a great balance.
Yeah, I mean, you have a pretty well faithful adaptation of the book, with a few little exceptions here and there. I mean, with Denis at the helm, I mean, you can't beat that combination. His work with Blade Runner 2049 and
that was the new one, right? Was that the new one?
Yeah, that was the new one.
Oh, he did that. That makes sense as far as the aesthetic of the movie.
And Arrival, he also did that. I don't know if we watched that one. But yeah, I mean, you can't beat the combination. But I mean, really, the majority of the story, though, was pretty faithful to the source material. So, I mean, you can't ascribe everything to just Denis and his presentation. He masterfully illustrated what was already there. So,
and from what you said, that this basically hits the middle point of the first book, right? Like this movie encapsulates half of the first book.
Yes.
Okay.
I will say it's very much, in some ways, it's like the cliff notes of it, though. I mean, there are things missing, of course, but it does go to about the halfway point of the book.
All right, before we get into it, we're going to do a deeper dive into. There's a few. Okay, so basically, Michael loves Dune, grew up with Dune, and this is actually I've never seen the movie from the '80s, never read the books, so like this was my first dive into anything Dune. So obviously, I've got plenty of questions. If you've seen the movie, I'm sure you've got countless questions. But before we do that, I'm going to do a little call to action. If you're watching this on YouTube, links below in the bio. If you would rather listen to this on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else you get your podcast from, and vice versa. You listen on Spotify, I'd rather video. Click in the bio or the show notes, and then you'll have a link to get to the YouTube. Like, follow, subscribe, and all of that. Now that we get that,
we need to eat.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Super awesome. Honestly, if you're going to do anything, go to Spotify, download, play, follow from there. That's actually a great deal. And if you have like Apple, if you can leave like a 5-star review, that actually helps a lot more than you would know. And it is free to do.
I think the only thing more mysterious than the ways of the Bene Gesserit is the YouTube algorithm.
Yeah, it is. It can be awesome and can quite often be a cold-hearted bitch at the same time.
Absolutely. All right, so I understand that you had a few questions for me. I know that you are the new person to this franchise, which is very expansive. We're talking six original books by Frank Herbert, then a dozen or more books written by his son and another party. So there's a lot to cover.
And kudos to the director and writer of this of the new Dune, because just knowing that there's that much material out there, I would have had three mental breakdowns before even like writing the first paragraph of this script. It's ridiculous.
The framework is all there in the book, though. This is a very faithful adaptation for the most part. There's a few differences.
All right, let's go ahead and start with the first question. So, since if I remember this correctly, this is sort of based in our reality, just far into the future, correct?
20,000 years into the future. So it would be 10,000 AG. So AG stands for After Guild, which is the Space Guild. Anything you have the first 10,000 years, which would be before Guild, which then touches back with our present reality. So you got about 20,000 years of history between us and them. And there are certain points where they, in the book series, where they will mention a few things from our past. For example, Judaism is mentioned actually a few times, and a few other things. I can't really remember off the top of my head, but there's,
Bullfighting is the one that stood out to me in the movie. Like the
yeah,
ancestor,
yeah,
ancestor
bullfighting.
was bullfighting.
And I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure if that was actually something added by this current iteration or if that was in the book. I don't remember, but there are a few little things here and there, but this is far, far, far into the future.
So, how does our world, as we know it here and now in 2021, lead to the world of Dune? Like, how do we get from here to there?
Okay, so a lot of that material is covered by Frank's son in his essentially expanded universe of the Dune series. The fan base is somewhat divided about this. um, some people consider it canon, some do not. I personally do not really care. I'm personally just excited to get more of this world. But so I won't get into that too much. That's a bit of the reads, but I will kind of outline the some key points in the history. Um, the number one thing that influences this particular universe would be the Butlerian Jihad, um, which was essentially the revolt of man against all things computerized and AI. So there was a massive war between man and machine, essentially.
So, like, some Terminator shit was happening.
Something like that, but there were people behind it as well. So there were AIs, but it was more man subjugating man through machine.
Okay.
But more importantly, there was more importantly, it was a war of the soul because man had become so reliant upon machine and computers and technology that they had lost some of their humanity. Um, and then there were also some elements of more of your traditional singularity type stuff, but not really heavily. It was always about man versus man, but this was just the tool that was used. But there were some, I believe, some instances of like in the extended universe of the AIs performing like experimentations on people, that sort of thing, forced abortions to cull the population and control people that way. But again, this is getting into some of the expanded stuff. Um, but basically, the core idea is that man had lost itself to automation and computers and um, artificial intelligences. So it became a religious war for the soul of humanity.
Okay.
That's the key part. It's less Terminator, more of a spiritual cleansing, a jihad.
Okay.
Um, but so the universe, and in this, because of this, man had to adapt. There is what is called the Orange Catholic Bible in universe. I want to actually read this quote because it's kind of poignant. Okay,
Okay.
thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind, and that's kind of the fundamental stage for what is the Dune universe. So if once the machines were removed from the universe, they then had to use humanity in place of the machines. So a lot of the different races that you see in Dune have been genetically enhanced and bred to fill those needs that were needed. For example, you have the Mentats as they're depicted in this. They're never actually mentioned as mentats, but they're the individuals who are rolling their eyes in the back of their heads to do computations. They've been bred genetically to be computers, to be able to do those advanced mathematical equations that were needed to run a galactic civilization.
Isn't another one the medic guy with the? I think there was like a diamond or something on his forehead.
Yeah, Dr. Ewan is I forget the name of it, but he's from essentially a medical school. Now they don't lean into this so much in the movie, but in the book, it's part of his genetic profile is that from the medical school that they come from, they are genetically unable to do harm. They cannot they cannot do any harm towards people. So
Really?
that adds to the impact of the betrayal in the storyline is the fact
Oh,
that
we didn't announce this up front, but spoiler alert. If you don't want anything spoiled, pause here and then come back after you watch the movie. In fact, I don't even know what you're doing listening to this if you haven't watched the movie yet.
this
So yeah,
entire episode is spoiler heavy. This
yeah.
should be spoiler alert.
If it wasn't already heavily implied, spoiler alert. Yeah. So yeah, okay. I wish I kind of would have known that part
Yeah.
beforehand. Like it was very impactful as is, but knowing that genetically he couldn't bring harm to people, and then it still happened this way.
Well,
Yeah.
right, but if you look in the if you watch in the movie as well, he also kind of curtails around actually doing any harm. So he's using tranquilizer darts, for example.
Right.
So there's no direct harm even then, but it's still a bit of a shock. So I will throw this in. One thing, there's a lot more buildup in the book. Um, like I would say, you could probably divide this movie into even longer parts.
I
Um,
will say the transition of setting up the story, them getting there, and then the deception and invasion happened a lot
mhm,
quicker than I thought it would. I was thinking the invasion happened closer to the end of the movie, like maybe towards the third act.
right. It's
So it did actually catch me off guard the way they did it. And it's almost kind of a good thing, like a good, like, ooh, I wasn't expecting that to go down just yet.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was there's a lot more of a build up. One thing I didn't really care for as much is there is a lot more build up in the book. You have there is an entire subplot with where they discover where Leto, what is that guy's name? Some of the names I still have the hardest time remembering because they're just so Thufir Hawat. Thufir Hawat.
How could you forget that name?
Well, yeah,
It's
Thufir Hawat.
such an everyday name.
So okay, so anyway, there. Okay, so in the book there is a minor subplot that involves Thufir Hawat discovering a letter from Baron Harkonnen describing a spy within the circles. It talks about how in the letter it says that Leto that this that essentially it says that this person in particular their betrayal will hurt the most. So in the letter, it's implied that it's someone very close to uh, Duke Leto.
Hmm.
And there's a whole subplot where Thufir Hawat actually accuses Lady Jessica of being a saboteur and a betrayer. So there is this entire subplot that goes in with that, and there's a lot of buildup. For example, there's actually an entire omitted scene where House Atreides actually does attack because of this subterfuge. They actually attack House Harkonnen. They attack their spice reserves. So there is kind of more of a build up leading up to the full invasion. In the book,
Huh.
so there's almost a quality with House Atreides in this movie. It almost makes them feel like they like a lamb being led to slaughter. But in the
That's
book,
definitely the feeling that I got. They were
right,
set up for failure.
well, that is in the book as well. I mean, it is a tragedy, but in the book, they've got more teeth. There's some playback going back and forth between the houses before there is that final punch of the invasion from House Harkonnen with the help of the Imperium. So some of that buildup, and I have heard rumors, and I'm so hopeful for this
The
that there
deleted
will.
scenes have got to be out there.
No, I've heard that there is supposedly an extended version of this movie, and that's the one that I really want to see. There are a lot of scenes that were omitted for pacing and time. I'm sure it's such a thick book to try to visualize, but I would still like to see some of that stuff added back in. There's an entire subplot of which it vaguely touches on where Paul is learning from Leto, and there's even a part where there's a scene where Paul has to host a dinner in for House Atreides for all the social elites of Arrakis. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it.
Now, why would they be fighting, might you ask? Spice? Is it melange? Is that how you pronounce it?
Lunge.
Melange. Spice melange. So go ahead and tell us what I'm just gonna say spice. Tell us what spice is. Why is it so important, and why is everyone fighting over this spice?
Okay, so spice is integral to the space field being able to traverse vast distances in the galaxy. So they use a special drive in their spaceships that move space from one point. They move space around the vessel and instantaneously transport it to another place in the galaxy. But in order to do this, requires advanced computations. Now, because there's no AIs or computers. This is performed with what are called the space field navigators, who are selected individuals who have been um, uh, suffered advanced mutations from heavy doses of spice melange. Um, they're very grotesque in nature. Almost, they're always described as almost aquatic in nature. They're submerged in a tank of pure refined spice, and they're constantly pumped through a spice. But from the high potency of the spice, it actually gives them precognition, where they're actually able to look ahead in the future to essentially like navigate any issues that might arise from instantaneous travel through space. So that's why the spice is so important. It is for the space travel because it allows the navigators to actually see into the future briefly to help navigate those ships. So we're looking at a galactic empire. The scale is massive.
Now that actually does remind me of something from Star Wars, which we could get into that conversation a little later. Grand Admiral Thrawn. So Chiss. Okay, so Grand Admiral Thrawn comes from a species called Chiss, and they're from like way, way, way out from I can't remember what it's called, like the unknown parts of the universe is where his species lives. Females within the Chiss have the ability, it's not force abilities, but they are the navigators of the ship. Like they don't use the same technology that the Empire would use to get around in the galaxy, but basically they can sort of foresee the future. That way they can navigate the ships to get to where they need to go. So it's kind of the same thing. But if you've ever read any of the Thrawn books, whenever they're within the Chiss ascendancy, the females, and they it's always from like a very young age, and then eventually they age out of being able to do it. But it's basically the same way, just without the absurd, spice. All right, well, enough about the Chiss. Go ahead and keep explaining about the navigators if you got anything else.
That's pretty much the extent of that, but that's kind of the thing you have to be aware of. The human has been refined and bred in such a way to handle the advances of the civilization. So, in place of a machine, you find a man doing the role of a machine in some form or fashion.
It is very interesting. So it's like they found a way with spice, I guess, with in most of these cases, to elevate the human race in a way that we couldn't even begin to imagine right now.
Right.
But very
Uh,
practically though too. So like you've got
yeah, it's
mathematics, navigation, like it's very, you know, very simple.
well, not really. So leading into so from there, you also have probably the most defined group of the series would be the Bene Gesserit.
It's actually a
Um,
very perfect swerve in because just go ahead and explain who are the Bene Gesserit.
they are an all-female, matriarchal, secretive group of women who, from the shadows, control the tides of the empire. Something that it mentions in the movie is they are on the scale of centuries. So they go and they plant ideas into people and cultures, um, and then allow through selective breeding programs, individuals to come along like Paul Atreides, for example. Um, it's all about control. They're controlling like they'll plant seeds using religious imagery and messianic characters to basically give themselves a backdoor into a society to where if they ever need to, they can come in and control said society.
The biggest example being Paul, the main character, as they
Yeah,
land, his first experience with these native people are people like pretty much praising him like he's the, Jesus or something.
yeah, he is the messianic character of Muad'Dib, which was created by the Bene Gesserit. Now, in the book and in the movie, one of the big conflicts is Lady Jessica was established by the Bene Gesserit to be to lead to the creation of Muad'Dib, but she herself was not supposed to give birth to Muad'Dib. It was all part of the genetic programming. So the basic idea was that her child, which was supposed to be female, they are able to control their birth, um, the what gender they have. So
Hmm.
the idea was that she was supposed to have all female children, and according to the plan that they had laid down was that that child was then to marry some son of the Harkonnen house, thus bridging the two main houses. And then that child was supposed to become the Moab, the messianic character.
And that house
So,
is the Brutes, the Dave Batista house. Is that right?
yes. What you get, so the reason that you see the test ritual, the box scene, is because Lady Jessica took it upon herself to have a son to go ahead and have for her love of because of her love of Leto Atreides. She wanted to give him a son to fulfill this. There's a subplot in the book where he had another son that he lost, so she wants to give him that son and also fulfill the prophecy of Moab. So she takes it upon herself to bring this messianic figure into the universe, which upsets the Bene Gesserit. It disrupts their plan because they think in terms of centuries. You know,
So
um,
are they just scheming or do they have some type of power that helps them plot the
um,
future?
they do have they use what's called the voice, which is
Oh yeah,
uh,
that's right. It's kind of like they can control people, right?
right. They have the ability to persuade heavy persuasion on people to get see the things that they want, which kind of sticks to the themes of the themes of the Bene Gesserit because you have a form of control. It's like an insidious form of control from behind. So the idea.
I hate to keep bringing this up. Sorry to interrupt. I keep relating it to Star Wars, and since you like we had talked previously about how the creator of the books claims that George Lucas basically ripped his work off whenever he made Star Wars, and just
Mhm.
seeing the similarities, like they just keep jumping out. I mean, it's almost like a Jedi using the mind trick, but
The
it's
mind
very
trick.
much more of an art form and so much more to it than just waving your hand at a
Yeah.
weak-willed person.
So one very distinct aspect of the Bene Gesserit is that they are not really a good organization necessarily.
Hmm.
They're more of a force of nature than a, pardon the pun, than a like a good benevolent organization. They're not necessarily evil. Don't think of them as evil either. They're just they have their own designs on things, as it says in the movie, their own plans, their own way of controlling the universe. So they have a much more active role in the events than you might see like a Jedi, for example, if that's what you want
Right.
to use.
They're almost like in the middle of Sith and light side. Like they're almost kind of in the middle. It's like almost as if like Emperor Palpatine's way of like his whole grand idea to pretty much build the empire also makes it like there's just I don't know. They come off of as very evil, but then you have Lady Jessica, which is very obviously not. It's like this weird juggle
I'm just not
act.
sure about that. No,
Don't well, I was getting a little bit of a weird vibe from her towards the end of the
well,
movie.
no, I mean it's that's the entire major theme of Dune, and I'm not ruining anything. I mean, for a nearly 60-year-old story, the the major theme and the thing that Frank Herbert was sitting down to talk about was the danger that comes from charismatic leadership, from those messianic figures who are coming in to save a civilization. And ultimately, as the books progress, you see how Paul Atreides was a destructive figure. Now, this you saw this in the movie. He says this in one of his visions that he sees a holy war with his name. He sees people fighting in the name of his father. Now, what that is he sees a vision of the future of a great holy war in his name. In the books, it over 60 million, I'm sorry, 60 billion people are killed in this holy war, led by himself and Fremen radicals.
Mm,
And eventually that leads to political upheaval in the galaxy. So that's part of the conflict within the character of Paul Atreides is the realization of the danger of what the messianic figure of Moab Deeb actually is to the universe. This is not there's a huge thing going on right now with people who aren't familiar with the series who think that this is the the traditional heroes arc. You want to
hmm.
make those comparisons to like Star Wars, for example, because that's where your brain goes. But this is more of a deconstruction of the hero's journey than the actual hero's journey itself.
That's what makes it so interesting, though. It kind of leads into
Right.
my next question. Just a few things about Paul. What's or his he's basically got the Benny Gesserit powers. He's been taught the way of doing.
Yeah, it's so one thing that it didn't mention in the movie, which was a bigger deal in the book, is he actually has mentat potential. So he is almost a supercomputer when it comes to his intellect. He has been taught in the Bene Gesserit way of using the voice,
Hmm.
well, the art of persuasion. It's not really the any specific power he himself has. It's the work that came before him that is actually so dangerous. It's the culmination of that Bene Gesserit pulling of the strings and planting the seeds that really makes him a dangerous character. In the book, it actually, and in the movie for a good point, it goes out of its way to describe Paul Atreides as a very flawed individual. He's not a Luke Skywalker who is a masterful warrior. He's
Yeah.
a flawed person. In the book, he's even described as being small for his age. He's a 15-year-old. It's a very good. I think it's great casting, actually.
Yes, very much so. Great actor too. So, like that kind of explains why he's so important to the overall story because he is in the center of this whole story, right?
The entire, are we talking all six books?
Let's just stick with what the movie's covered, or
Um,
whatever you would consider the main books. I
the
guess the
the
six.
Atreides line has a lot of impact, but the six books cover thousands of years. So
Oh, okay, gotcha.
yeah,
I mean,
the
I do love his dynamic with his father, especially because Paul
it,
doesn't necessarily want to, pick up the mantle of his father. In the movie, it does a good job of explaining that he's way more excited about becoming, you know, um, like a pilot. But then, there's like that great scene. I'm not sure if these lines were in the book, but it's like essentially a great man doesn't want the mantle, he's called to it. Like that whole scene was phenomenal.
yeah, that entire scene was fabricated for the movie. Um,
I loved it
which
nonetheless.
yeah, again, it kind of goes into there's a lot of subplots in the book that they kind of streamline into that scene. So it deals with a lot of things there. Wonderful scene, I agree. I do hope there is more to the dynamic between Paul and his father. Maybe in an extended version, I'd love to see that. So anyway, it's not about there being a superhero. This is the anti superhero. This is the anti hero's journey, and I don't mean like a anti-hero like a Han Solo. I mean this is a complete deconstruction of that and the themes that plays with. So I won't go into too much detail, but I will say that House Atreides and Paul and Lady Jessica are not characters to be worshipped and looked at as a ultimately they're not really good people necessarily. They're very deeply flawed people for sure. And what the Dune saga is the establishment of this and then the deconstruction of that to the point like of showing how um, people can be suckered into having these charismatic leaders brought before them, and how it should come with a warning label.
It's a piece of art. The way that the story develops in that way makes it feel more real. Me personally, that is what makes me buy into this. It almost feels as if this could actually happen, 10,000 years down the road. Like it makes it something that looks so epic and like there's space travel. Like it feels real, even though there's this grandiose imagery. Like the story it tells makes it like just pulls me in. And not now like I love Star Wars and other stuff like that, Marvel movies, but it's like that doesn't feel real. That doesn't feel possible, but it's fun. This is a piece of art that just kind of pulls you in.
Yeah, ultimately, Dune is the story of what it means to be human and what the dynamics and power plays are in being human. It's almost a sociological treaty on humans ruling humans and how those things can dissolve to become something far worse than what people were trying to get away from. And there's a lot of deep philosophy in this.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go ahead and start wrapping up. Overall, what did you think of Dune Part 1?
I loved it, hands down. I loved it. Since we went and saw it, actually, I've watched it five more times, I believe. Or I'm working on my fifth now. I do have it paused on my television at the moment. I deeply enjoyed this movie. It was wonderful to see a definitive, in my opinion, movie of Dune, and one that is taken very seriously. And I do see those themes present in the source material in this movie. So I'm glad to see that. But I do hope to see that nice 5 hour long extended version at some point in time in the future. I would love to have more. I want more of this.
I think what they did cut, like I've never read the books, obviously, but you have. Do you feel like the things that they did cut and or streamline, did it make sense in order to make it into a movie? Do you think that it lost anything major?
There is a perspective shift from the point of view of the Fremen that they're seen as more of a subjugated people. It's told more from the point of view of the Fremen than it is in the book. It even opens up with Chani giving the exposition at the very beginning of the story. That's not in the book, but that changes the tone and puts it. This makes it it makes it a tale about subjugated people fighting
Mm.
against their rulers, and that's not really in the book. So that is a tweak, and there the I would have loved to have seen a bit more of some of the extra back and forth scenes, the subterfuge that came in the beginning of the book. I would have liked to have seen some of that. It makes House Atreides seem more competent. One of the lines is, in order to escape the trap, you must first see it. And I don't think you really see that in this movie. That's more pronounced in the book. And that comes more from that Paul Leto dynamic that it's still there. And they did a good job of getting that into this film in a shorter amount of time, but it was a lot more in depth in the book. And I wish more of that was there. Yeah, overall, I like the direction that this movie is headed.
I was a little surprised we didn't get more scenes with Johnny. So I like it was more or less outside of the scenes towards the end of the movie, just the flashbacks. Like I would have thought that shortly after them being invaded or whatever, we would have seen them meet much sooner. But I think the way
Mhm.
that they did it was pretty cool. So like it didn't seem stale.
No, that's pretty well keeping with the book. You don't get that interaction between those two characters until the second half of the book. That's pretty close to it.
And I
Um,
love how she looked so dreamy or whatever in like the flashes that he was seeing. And then once they do meet, she's very different.
well, okay, so that is actually a really good point, and that's something that is in this film intentionally. So again, going into the plans laid out by the Bene Gesserit, you see that you see the human coming into these prophecies where things don't always go exactly as foretold, but it has a way of kind of coming into fruition anyway.
For example, like the knife and then the stabbing and all that stuff.
One of the things that you definitely see is in the character of Jamis, the Fremen who Paul kills at the end of the film. In the initial premonitions, he sees him being a mentor to him. So
Right.
you're already seeing these deviations from the the proposed story of this messianic character, and that's kind of the rub with this story is are the heroes that are foretold inevitably are flawed and simple creatures. And one of the ideas that comes along in later works is who are mortals to be gods, who are we to take upon these roles, and that's a theme that continues very much into the later books.
Well,
There's a reason. There's a reason why one of the books is entitled "The God Emperor of Dune." That's very much where it's going.
let's peel that back. So in the original, let's just call it Vision, he saw that guy
Hmm.
as a mentor that, well, he was going to take him under the wing and show him the way, or etc. So why didn't it end up that way? Did he make a decision that altered the future? And if so, what was that decision?
Yeah, no, it's implied, and it goes into more depth in the book because you get to see more of the inner workings of his mind. But the the holy war in his name scares Paul. It's not something that he wants. I mean, imagine that much death in your name. Imagine the real weight of what it means to be Muad'Dib to these people, and he sees how the Fremen will spew from Arrakis and conquer every corner of the galaxy. So by him going against the premonitions, it's Paul going against the the story that's laid out before him of this messianic figure. So it's kind of a reluctance to go into that.
And for anybody who doesn't remember this part, whenever he puts his hand in that box, proves that he's worthy, etc., the lady basically tells his mom, "We've laid the groundwork. Make sure he doesn't fuck this up," is basically what she says.
Right.
So, with him making these actions that kind of mess up whatever the future is supposed to be, different things come out. So, instead of that guy end up being a mentor towards him, he actually ends up, you know,
Murdering him.
murdering him in combat. Now, it was like sanctions, mutual combat to the death. So, I
But
mean, like, it wasn't like it was in cold blood or anything like that. He didn't want to kill him, and in fact, in that fight, it showed him giving him many, options to, say I wield, and that's just not their way of life, as far as I can tell. So it was, one of them were gonna die.
there's hints of this. I mean, it's almost like a bait and switch in a lot of ways because it wants you to fall into what you expect it to be of how things will go with this story, but you see from the very beginning that things aren't going to go necessarily in a direction. And it also raises the question, does Paul even have the power and the ability to come off of this path if he so chose? Because even by going from what he foresaw, you still have him slowly taking steps to become this messianic figure that the Fremen will have a war in his name for.
Hmm.
And it raises the question: can he escape? Is it something that can be done? Going back to the statement about the box, they're testing Paul Atreides as whether or not he has the humanity in him to actually take part in this role. She says they sift people like sand to filter out the people from or the humans from the people. So they want to know if he has the ability to control himself in order to become this character or this messianic figure.
What a cool scene too! Like, his acting chops really showed in that scene.
Right, but it raises doubts initially, and that's the big theme with this is, do we want a single human individual to steer the course of humanity into a singular direction? And that's something that comes up again and again in the series. And ultimately, I will say that the answer is no, but it seems to be inevitable.
Well, it seems to be a trend in humanity over and over and over and over. But yeah, good stuff. I love this movie. And like, usually when you leave a theater with questions, it's usually a bad thing in most cases. But in this movie, my curiosity was just very much piqued, and I just can't wait to see where it goes next. Like, like, I'm so invested in this movie, and it's been a long time since I've been invested in this way with anything really. But I mean, we you obviously know where Dune Part Two is going to start going since you've read the books.
Well, you essentially know where it's going just from the premonitions in this one. I mean, there's no real secret to that. And it's not, but that's kind of the point, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get across is it's not
Well, let me backstep on that question because I was going to change it.
okay.
Let's bring it out of you know Dune space and get into the politics of movies just for a second.
Okay.
Do you have, because like since you already know and the way the story's set up, we kind of know where Dune Part Two is going to start going. So instead of that, do you have any concerns since this movie is such a hit that we're going to get into this too many hands in the pot bullshit that, like the DC movies tend to do, where executives come in and want to change shit. So, like, for the most part, this guy made this movie and no one really messed with the movie, and the movie came out the way he wanted it to come out. I think he's got weight in Hollywood so he can do that. So, hopefully, we won't see that. But we have seen that in cases like with Snyder, with the Justice League movie, and the sequel trilogy to Star Wars was in shambles because there were just too many people giving their opinions, and then J.J. Abrams, all of that
I,
bullshit. Everyone knows. Are you afraid of something like that happening with Dune?
I'm not. So my reasoning for this is, first of all, Dune is not a massive hit even now. I think Denis makes smart movies for smart people, and I don't think that's necessarily approachable by general audiences. He's not making movies for the mass majority of people. He's making very, very niche sci-fi stories about humanity, and I don't think that's something that most people are even going to be interested in. So no, I think it'll be fine. I don't see there being any future like too much meddling in that way. As a matter of fact, I'm grateful that they've greenlit part two because that has very much been something that was not set in stone.
They greenlit it before the movie even officially came out in theaters too. It was like a couple
Well,
days
yeah,
before or the day of.
but it was the test screenings
Mm-hmm.
and some of the earlier screenings in the European market that actually brought that about. So they did test it, and I don't think the normal person. It's frankly, it's a smart movie for smart people, and we don't live in a world full of those. So
Yeah. Yeah, I hope it never happens. With that being said, how many parts do you think that we'll get in cinematic form? Do you think it'll be a trilogy? Do you think they'll keep going as long as they can? Because there's obviously a lot of material for them to do.
Denis has expressed interest in doing multiple movies. I don't think it'll follow the full book catalog of the original six, but I could see the first few books being adapted at least.
Yeah. I kind of hope that as long as the same guy stays on board to do them, that they'll keep going. I think a trilogy is a good sweet spot for most people. That's people do trilogies. So I think I feel apprehensive to see anyone else handle it because he handles it so well.
Yeah, this is a passion project of his. He's wanted to make this movie since he was 14. He's wanted to adapt Dune for that long, so I have a lot of faith in his ability to caretake of that property.
All right, let's wrap it up there. It's a lot to unpack. It's a very complex and expansive movie, much less book. Like Jesus, you bought me the books, and like the first one is I think the biggest one out of the three. It's a
Mhm.
huge undertaking, and like we could honestly do a whole 4 or 5 part series on just Dune itself, going through anything and everything. But go ahead and wrap it up right there. I'm sure we'll come back to it, especially once part two's about to come out. We might touch back and kind of do a what happened in part one type episode or something. But let's go ahead and do that call to action. If you're on YouTube, links below to get you to the Spotify. Follow, download the episodes, play it from there. If you're already on the podcast parts, links below. You can get us to the YouTube if you prefer the video version. If I'm being honest, I'd much rather you hop on that Spotify or all. But if you're able to leave reviews, please do. They help a lot more than you actually know. But go ahead and see you there. So yeah, Dune. It's fucking. I'm a fan. You were trying to butter
Awesome.
me up for months and
I told
months,
you. I
and I'm a
told you.
fan.
I
So
told you. It's wonderful.
we'll kick it there.